Welcome back, students. This is going to be video number 2 in discussing chapter 3 of Access. So when we left off on video number 1, we were talking about using the and in our queries. So when we're talking about using and, what we really mean is when you have multiple criteria that are related to each other. Okay, when you use and, the criteria are related to each other because it's like a connection of the two criteria. Adding them together provides different results than having them apart or having them as not even there. Now, what we could when we want to think about this, when you're looking let's just say you're looking for a person by their first name and their last name. Okay, so you don't mutually exclude the first name from the last name when you're looking for that person. You put them both together. So if you had a first name field and a last name field, you would put the person's first name in the first name field under criteria, and the person's last name in the last name field under criteria in your database. So that way it would search to pull back that specific person or persons with that first and last name. Okay, so that's what we mean when we're talking about and. We're talking about things that are joined together, related, so to provide you with exclusive information utilizing those two criteria. Right, so let's look at, let's just look here. So when we talk about this, so using the patient ID, doctor ID, diagnosis, date diagnosed, medication prescribed, and refill fields from the diagnosis table, create a query to find all the patients who were seen by Dr. Daniel Mari before 2/3/18, were given prescriptions, and had refills issued to them. So we are going to find all the patients who were seen by Dr. Daniel Mari before 2/3/18. They were given prescriptions and they had refills issued to them. So all of this entire statement out right here, this entire sentence is filled with criteria that relates to each other. First, Daniel Mari relates to 2/3/18 because we're looking for his patients. Okay? Just as we're looking for all the patients that he saw before 2/3/18 and gave prescriptions to and had refills. All right? Now, when I am doing this query, I definitely need to notice something. And some of you might be, well, let's actually get into it, and then we'll come back to discuss that. So let's say using patient ID, doctor ID, diagnosis, date diagnosed, and medication prescribed. So we're going to come here. We're going to create a new query. I'm going to save the changes to my recent diagnosis. So actually, I'm just going to copy the gallstone query, so that way we get used to copying queries. It may be important later on. Wink, wink. I'm going to name this query Mari Patient Refills. Maury Patient Refills. I say OK. So now I have Mari Patient Refills, and I'm going to open it. let me say this. If you, oh, well, let's just open it up. Okay. So once again, we copied the gallstones query. So we're going to have to remove any criteria from that. We need to make sure we're in the right query when we do this. We are in the query we created, which is the MARI patient's refill. Okay. Now, what were the things that we needed? The fields. We needed patient ID, doctor ID, diagnosis, date diagnosed, medication prescribed, and refill fields. So, patient ID, doctor ID, diagnosis, date diagnosed, medication prescribed, and this refill field. So that means we can delete this comment field. Oops, sorry. So right click, cut, and we can delete this date of initial visit field. All right. So let's read this. We're going to create a query to find all the patients who were seen by Dr. Daniel Mari. So Dr. Daniel Mari before 2/3/18. These patients were also given a prescription and they had refills issued to them for those prescriptions. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. So hopefully you can already see the issue that we're going to have. Okay? And maybe if we read a little closer, it will become more evident. All right, so let's do this. First, we're going to create a query to find all the patients who were seen by Dr. Daniel Mari. So Dr. Daniel Mari. Now, where are we going to put? So this is the first. This is one issue. There's another more pressing issue that you will find later on. So Dr. Daniel Mari. If I come in here, and the only place that I can even remotely, or that I have a field related to doctors, is in the doctor ID field. So if I want to filter out all the results for only Dr. Daniel Mari, if I put in his name, Daniel M-A-U-R-Y, Daniel Mari, just like that, and I run it, I'm not going to get any results. Why is that? Well, the easy answer is, number one, that doctor ID field does not have the name of the doctor attached to it. There's no name of the doctor. Okay? So, if we put in Daniel Mari in the doctor ID field, we're going to get 0 results. What we have to do is we have to find Dr. Mari's ID. So we need to go to the doctor table, find Mari, Daniel, and then find his doctor ID. There we go. So we have the doctor ID. Now we can put that doctor ID in there, and let's see. Okay, so now we have 95 results. We can check that by doing a filter of all the to show only Dr. Daniel Mari's patients. We have an issue here. We only see 6. Because our date diagnosed was still so we got to make sure that all the filters are cleared before we do this stuff, right? So now we can see we have 95. Go back. 95 results once we filter for Dr. Mari's ID. We have 95 results once we filter for Dr. Mari's ID as well. Okay. Now, let's do next. So we're all patients who were seen by Dr. Mari. So we have Dr. Mari. They were seen by Dr. Mari before 2/3/18. Okay. So that's a date. Here is the issue. What So you need to be thinking, we said seen by Dr. Mari. Seen, what does that mean? When we talk about that they were seen, you went to see your doctor on a specific date. Okay? Well, that means that seen is a visit date. We don't have a visit date here. We have a date diagnosed, but we don't have a date visited. So we need to add the date of the initial visit. Okay? The date of the initial visit, and we can move that before the date diagnosed as well. All right? So we can take that. To do that, just click on the top of the column, and then hold down your left your left click on your mouse, hold it down and drag it over. Okay, drag it over. There we go. Okay, so now we have the date of the initial visit, which is good because we want people who were seen before that day. Seen before that day. So notice, even though it didn't say that, we had to add that part in. Had to add that in because we said seen by. Seen by is a visit, right? It's a visit. And those people, it's not a date of diagnosis. All right? So we had to add, that's why we had to add it. So before 2/3/18. Remember, before 2/3/18 means what operator do we do? Do we do greater than, less than, equal to? Less than, equal to, greater than, equal to? The answer, it was we do less than. Okay? Less than. 2/3/2018. Remember, going back to our Excel, before is less than. The alligator mouse should be pointing to the back of the box. Okay? Because the values of dates before 2/3/18 are less than the value of the date of 2/3/18. Okay, so before, we're going to put the less than symbol, and we can go ahead and, let's go ahead and run that. And it says we went from 95 to 58. Let's check our diagnosis table. So date of initial visit, we go to date filters, before. Now remember, this is an inclusive before, meaning it's saying on or before. So we have to exclude 2/3/18 to get the correct results. Okay? So in this case, we want all dates on or before 2/2/2018. We say okay. And there we go. We got 58 results. So 58 results. Okay? And that matches the results we got with our query. Next, they were given prescriptions and then they had refills issued to them. So were given prescriptions and had prescriptions refills issued to them. Now what we need to notice in our table is that these two fields are yes, no fields, meaning that their field type, data type, is yes or no. We basically, if the box is checked, it means yes. If it's not, then it means no. Okay? So yes, no, yes, no. Okay? This one's checked, so it's yes. This one's not, so it's no. Right? So the question is, how then do we type in yes, no with, or yes or no with parentheses around them, or quotation marks, excuse me? Do we do that? Or how are we going to do that? In fact, do we want it to say yes, or do we want it to say no? So once again, they were given prescriptions. So that means yes, they had a prescription and they had refills issued to them. So yes, they had a refill. So both of these should be yes. So the question is then, do we put yes in quotes and hope that works? We can actually see if it works. Uh-oh, it says data type mismatch in criteria expression. Now that means, what that means, data type mismatch in criteria expression, it means that out of one or multiple of these criteria that were in place, the type of data that we said to look for is not what is found in that particular field. And we know that these two data types are correct. We know that this is text, right? We know that that's text because we can come here and we can see that this is a text field, and we can come here and we can see that this is a date time field. Okay, remember I had y'all change that to date time, and that's why. All right, that's why, so we could do this. So let's go back. So the only two fields that we had a problem with are these two then, because we put quotations in there, and then we got that. Issue. So the question then becomes, do we need the quotations? And the answer is no, we don't. I can just type out yes, and the computer, the program understands, okay? The program understands what yes means without quotations, okay? So, and I'll show you it does by running this, and we can see that we only see people who have been seen by Dr. Murray who have been given before 2/3/18, okay, 2/3/18, and they had both medication prescribed and refills. All right, so those two things, all those things are true together. So there we go. As you see, it knows that this is a yes. That yes is a so yes is recognized by the program and does not need those things. Okay, so that was the and. Remember, when you're doing and, they all have to be on the same line. So they all need to be in the criteria. If I put one below on the next line, then that would mean that was mutually exclusive from anything on this line. So things below, so things on the same line are related to each other, are criteria related to each other. Things below mean they're not related to what is above, so it's separate or mutually exclusive. And we'll talk about that next, because we're going to talk about, using or. All right, so we're going to talk about using or in the. So now we're going to discuss using or in our statements or in our queries. So when we talk about and, we notice that everything was on the same line, okay? And that's because all of it is connected. We are filtering the data so that way it is it's using all those criteria, putting it together and searching for it. And when you do a search on Google, you type out a bunch of words, it considers all of the words to be together, joined together, so you can find your search. When you're using or, okay, you're actually separating. It's like doing two separate searches, okay? So it's like doing two searches on Google. the criteria are mutually exclusive from each other. So once again, we're going to be using the patient ID, doctor ID, and diagnosis fields from the diagnosis table. We're going to create a query to find all the patients who had been diagnosed with allergies or tonsillitis. Name the query throat issues. Throat issues. Okay, so there we go. We're going to create a query. So create a query. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Say yes, we saved that. Oh, we never did finish this. Let's see. We had 30. I think we had like 20 something results, and I think 26. Yeah, 26 results. There we go. So now I just need to remove remove all the filters. There we go. So toggle the filters. So let's go ahead. We're going to create a new query. And this time we're not going to copy like we did last time. We're going to use query design. It's good to use the different methodologies in order to be able to do these things. Okay? And like I said, you can do it one way or another. If you want to copy it and then change it through there, you can do that, or you can create it. Just being able to create it is what you want to do. So we're going to go to the diagnosis table, and we're going to use patient ID, doctor ID, and diagnosis. Patient ID, doctor ID, diagnosis. And there we go. And our criteria are going to be all patients who had been diagnosed with allergies or tonsillitis. Now, what you should notice here is you see there's a criteria row in the window down here, and then you have an or row. So whenever we have an or criteria, whenever we have criteria that are mutually exclusive, right, then we are going to do one of them over here on this row and one over there. Okay, so one under there. So we could have said we wanted, so let's go ahead and do that first. Let's do this. So we need to make sure that we are spelling allergies. Remember, we have to spell everything the same way it's spelled in the table. Otherwise, it will not come back. All right? So we have to spell allergies the same way it's spelled in the table, and we have to spell tonsillitis the same way that it's spelled on the table. So let's go ahead. I'm going to take the table, and I'm actually going to copy one of the instances of allergies, and I'm going to use that in diagnosis. So I'm going to put that allergies on the criteria row, and then on the or row, I'm going to go ahead and put tonsillitis. So I'm going to find a tonsillitis over here, and we're going to go back to the query, put it there, and we're going to go and run our query. We should have 35 results. So 35 results, allergies and tonsillitis. We can check by going over here to the diagnosis table. We do this little drop down arrow up here to filter, and we're going to uncheck the select all. We're going to select allergies, then we're going to go down and we're going to select tonsillitis, hit OK, and we come out with 35 different cases. Okay, 35 different cases. Right? So, let's go ahead and do that. Sorry, I'm going back to the... So, we could have also done something similar to say we wanted all patients who were diagnosed with allergies, or they saw Dr. Carson, Alexander Carson. So we would need the Dr. Alexander Carson's doctor ID. Dr. Alexander Carson's doctor ID. So if they had allergies or they saw Dr. Carson, okay, remember allergies would go in criteria, Carson's doctor ID would go in the or, and we could go to datasheet view, and we'll notice that we get 86 results. And we should get, so what we'll notice is we'll get not only Dr. Carson's, Dr. Alexander's patients, but we're also getting other doctors because we can see different doctor IDs, such as YC, TK, SM, So to check that, what we would do, to check what we would want to do, cancel, oops. So we need to filter out we need to make sure we keep everybody here in this. Alright. And this one's a little bit more difficult because what I'm actually doing is I'm finding all the people who had seen Dr. Carson. Okay? So I'm finding all the people who had seen Dr. Carson. So what I can do, so what I can do is I can say, all right, all people who have seen Dr. Carson. Or Dr. Alexander. Dr. Alexander. His first name's Carson. So all the people who have seen Dr. Alexander, there are a list of 75. Now we have 86 people who have seen Dr. Carson or been diagnosed with allergies. All right. So we have, out of all this, we have 75. And what we can already notice is that Dr. Carson Alexander has been has diagnosed some patients with allergies. Okay, so we have 75 there, and what we'd want to do then is, well, let's do this. Let's take out everybody, because now we're going to find out. We're going to take out all instances of Dr. Alexander. Okay, Dr. Alexander. We're going to take out those, and we're going to filter to show everybody else who has done allergies. And we have 11. Okay, so we have 11 records. And Dr. Alexander's Dr. ID should not be in this. So 11, so we have 11. 11 plus 75 is 86, which is exactly what we should have. All right, 11 plus 75. So that one was a little bit more difficult. Let's change it back to tonsillitis. This back to tonsillitis to make sure that we appropriate. But that's how I would check that one. Okay, we have the appropriate thing. There we go. And let's view 35. We already did that. We're going to save this, and we are going to call this throat issues. Throat issues. And let's go ahead. We can close this. Now remember, if I did not name this correctly, I can right click and rename. You must name them correctly. If you do not name them correctly, you will end up with a bad score on your test. Your program, SimNet, is looking for the exact name of the table or query or form or report. It is looking for that exact name as it was spelled in SimNet. And if it's not there, you won't get credit for that. Okay, if it can't find it, it won't give you credit for that. All right. Let's go on to the next. So next we're going to talk about using and or together. So what this means is that in a search, in a query, you have some criteria that is mutually exclusive, and then other criteria that connects to those mutually exclusive criteria. And you'll see this better in a second when we go over this. Okay, so you'll see this better in a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to use using all the fields from the diagnosis table. So we're going to use all the fields from the diagnosis table. Let's go ahead, close all this stuff up right quick, and create. We're going to do a wizard, simple query wizard. We're going to do all the fields from the diagnosis table, just like that. These double arrows send everything over. So we're going to do that. There we go. And we're going to name this query Sanchez patients with throat issues. Sanchez patients with throat issues. Alright, we need to make sure we spell it correctly. And we're going to open this to modify the query in design. Okay. I'm going to modify the query in design. Okay, so now I have all of these created. I don't need to add any tables or anything like that. Oops. Get that out of here. So what we're going to do is we're going to find all the patients. So all patients who had been diagnosed with allergies or tonsillitis on or before 1/1/2019 by Dr. Maria Sanchez. Okay, so we already see something similar from last time. We did the allergies or tonsillitis. So we already know we're going to use both levels of the both criteria and the OR rows in our query design window over here, down here. Okay, so what we're going to do is, once again, we're going to make sure we spell allergies correctly. Let's go ahead and open up diagnosis. We're going to make sure we spell allergies correctly. We're going to put allergies there, and we're going to put tonsillitis here. Okay, oops, tonsillitis underneath it, just like we did in the instance before. Now we have to be able to understand how we have two mutually exclusive criteria in the diagnosis table: allergies and tonsillitis. Okay, allergies. We're looking for allergies or tonsillitis. Now, the thing about this is, after that, we have two more criteria. We have a date criteria and Dr. Maria Sanchez. That's another criteria. Okay, now the question becomes, where do we insert, and what line do we insert the criteria? Okay, in what line do we insert the criteria to find people who have had allergies or who've been diagnosed with allergies or tonsillitis by Dr. Maria Sanchez on or before 1/1/2019? Now, some of you might sit there and say, oh, but there's another or, so I need to put this on or before. That means that I'm going to have to put it on two separate lines. Like, I'm going to have to put on is equal to and before is less than, according to our Excel worksheet. And we'll go back to that in a minute. So, but, okay, this is just, so when you see the or here, we're talking about time. So we're talking about including, excluding dates. We do not want to separate dates when that is. When you see an or in a criteria field other than dates, right? When you say on or, So if this would, basically this would have to say on or before 1/1/2019, or after, something like after or after 2/10/2019. Okay, when you have multiple dates, that's when you'd possibly have to use both lines. Okay, when you have multiple dates, that's when you'd possibly have to use both lines. Okay, but this is just one date, and we're going to use an operator to signify on or before. And then Dr. Maria Sanchez. So what I want to know basically is, does the date criteria and the criteria of Dr. Maria Sanchez, is that tied to allergies? Is it tied to tonsillitis? Or is it tied to both criteria? Okay? Both of these criteria. Both of these diagnoses. And the answer is, it's tied to both. Okay? It's tied to both. Because we only want to know about patients who had been seen by Dr. Maria Sanchez and diagnosed with this disease, or diagnosed with this disease on or before this date. Okay, so it's like you're creating two queries, right? Two separate queries. Again, but in here, what we're saying is, I want to see all the patients Maria Sanchez said had diagnosed with allergies on or before 1/1/2019. And then you're creating a separate query that says, I want to see all the patients that Maria Sanchez diagnosed with tonsillitis on or before 1/1/2019. So get it? So Dr. Maria Sanchez is associated with both of these things, with both of these criteria, as well as the date. So we have to put in Dr. ID, we have to find Dr. Maria Sanchez's ID and use that. So we're going to go to that, and we're going to go, there's that. And we're going to put it on both lines. So we put it on both lines because it's like we're making two separate criteria, okay, or two separate searches. So then we have the date diagnosed, which is on or before 1/1/2019. Now, going back to our Excel, on or before is less than or equal to, because we're looking for all the dates in the past, including the date that we are interested in. Okay? Including the date that we're interested in, which is 1/1/2019. So over here in date diagnosed, we're going to go less than equal to, which is on or before 1/1/2019, and we're going to copy that and paste it down there as well. Okay? So all these things, so this first line is tied together and this second line is tied together. And now we're going to find out people who have been seen by Dr. Maria Sanchez, who had tonsillitis or allergies and were seen before 1/1/2019. Okay? And that's it. Now, if we did not do that, if we didn't put Dr. Maria Sanchez or 1/1/2019, actually, let's just say we didn't put Dr. Maria Sanchez on both lines, but we did put the date on both lines. Now we get everybody who is been diagnosed with tonsillitis before 1/1/2019, or all of those who have been diagnosed by Maria Sanchez with allergies before on or before 1/1/2019. So notice what you'll have is you only have one instance of allergies because we only had one right last time, and we have multiple instances of tonsillitis because we're not excluding the doctor ID in that. The only thing we excluded in there is anything after 1/1/2019. So let's go back to design view, add that, and now we're going to go run, and we're going to go to the diagnosis table, and to figure this one out, we're going to filter for only Dr. Sanchez's ID. We're going to do the date diagnosed, the date filter before, and remember this is inclusive, so 1/1/2019, okay, inclusive of the date. So now we have all of Dr. Sanchez's diagnoses before or on 1/1/2019. And now we're going to filter out the diagnosis. Okay, we're going to do allergies, tonsillitis. There we go. We only have two. Great job. All right, let's go ahead and save this. We're going to close that. Let's undo the filters there. Okay. Let's go on to the next part. Actually, before we do that, let me go back and remind you. When we're talking about we're talking about criteria that are on the same row. Okay, they're on the same line or row as each other. When we're talking about or, we're talking about criteria that are on different rows. Okay, different rows. And then when we're talking about using and or for our criteria, we're talking about things, criteria that have there's a field with criteria that are mutually exclusive to each other, such as our allergies and tonsillitis or tonsillitis. But then they have other things that are related to it, which were the date in this instance and Dr. Maria Sanchez. Those two things were both related to allergies and to tonsillitis. Okay, although allergies and tonsillitis were mutually exclusive, we wanted them to be mutually exclusive. Okay, all right. So now let's go on to our next portion, which is creating a calculated field. Okay, creating a calculated field. So in our calculated field, what we're going to do is we're going to create we're going to select all fields except for medication prescribed and refill from the diagnosis table. Actually, we're also going to leave out the another field, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Let me go ahead and create. Choose whichever one you wish. So I'm going to do query design. Now I'm going to do diagnosis. I'm just going to select them all. Actually, you know what? We don't need refill or prescription, and actually let's leave out comments too. So I'm going to select patient ID all the way to date diagnosed, and I'm going to drag those down, and there we go. All right. So now I have it. Now what I want to do is I want to create a calculated field at the end of the table, or it should say at the end of the query, showing how many days it took from the date of the initial visit to get a diagnosis for each patient. Okay. Maybe another, we'll talk about another way to say this in a minute. We're going to name the new field days to diagnosis, name the query number of days to diagnose patient. Okay? Number of days to diagnose patient. So, whenever we are creating a calculated field, we need, and we're doing it in a new field, we need to come to the end, into one of these blank columns. And in here, what we're going to do is we can do a couple things. We can right click and select this build, or we can come up to here and click on this builder option. They're both the same thing. All right. So first things first. What you should see in here, this is an expression builder dialog box. So what this does is it allows us to create certain create calculated fields or expressions, if you will, so kind of like mathematical equations and or comparisons between two separate values, such as if you wanted to see if one values in one field were greater or less than values in another. So it allows us to do expressions, and that's for lack of a better term. So what you have here are your different expression elements. Right here is the query that you are currently in. These are functions that you have available to you to utilize for your expression builder. You don't have to really worry about these. Maybe in some advanced classes, if you ever get into that, you might, but in our class you don't. This is going to be our database. So this is our current database that we're in. Constants, well, these are just statements that you don't need to worry about at this point in time. True, false, and null. Operators are different things like addition, subtraction. You can see greater than, equal to, does not equal. You have a lot of different things. And then other common expressions that are used for this. So we're going to focus on the expressions elements and then the expressions categories. Okay. Now, if you come into the expression builder and you see nothing in your expression category, and I'm glad it did this, if you see nothing in the expressions categories, you have your best thing to do is to do this. So my objective is to see how many days it took from the date of the initial visit to get a patient a diagnosis. So I've pulled all my information from the diagnosis table. If I don't see expression categories that show field names, so you see these field names up here, if I don't see these over here, what I can do is I can come to my database and I can click this little drop down. All right, little drop down. And then I can click on the tables. All right, or I mean, in this instance, you could also click on query, but it might not work. So let's click on the table because it's not finished. So the table. Where are we pulling our data from? We're pulling our data from the diagnosis table. That's the table we care about. So we're going to grab the information that we desire from the diagnosis table. We're going to grab the information from the diagnosis table. And what information do we want? Well, from the diagnosis table, we want the date of the initial visit, and we want the diagnosis for each patient, the date of the diagnosis. Okay. So, in this instance, what we're going to do is we're going to use the date diagnosed, because that date should be greater than, in terms of value, the date of the initial visit. If you haven't visited the doctor, you shouldn't be getting a diagnosis from the doctor, right? If you've never gone to visit the doctor, you should not be getting a diagnosis from it. So the date has to be So this date, the date diagnosed, has to be greater than the date of the initial visit. So what we're going to do, or what you would want to do, is you would want to subtract out the date of the initial visit. Okay, let's just make sure. So I'm going to subtract out the date of the initial visit from the date of the diagnosis. Now, what this is showing is that we are getting the date diagnosed field. So this is the date diagnosed field from the date diagnosed table. That exclamation point is just a separator saying between field and table. Okay, so this is the table, this is the field. Okay, it's telling us we got it from the we got these fields, the data from. We're pulling the data from this table from this field. Okay, so what we're doing is we're subtracting the date diagnosed we're subtracting the date of the initial visit from the date diagnosed, and that should give us a positive number. Okay, that should give us a positive number. All right, so when we say OK, it is going to build an expression, and the expression is found down here in the column, and it's exactly what you saw in that in the expression builder. Right now, if I run this right now, what you can see is, here we go. We can see how many days it took people to get their diagnosis. Okay, and it varies. We can see all the way up to 30. Hopefully not more than that, but we can at least see up to 30. Now, the issue is, how do we rename this field? Some of us might try to come out here, double click. Oh man, if you double click or right click, it doesn't allow you to rename. So how am I supposed to rename this field? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go back into design view. All right. And we're going to come over to our newly created field, and we're going to, where it says EXPR, it usually has a number and then a colon. We are going to erase the EXPR, but we're going to leave the colon. Okay? We're going to leave the colon. And then we're going to type in what the field should be called. Days to diagnosis. Days to diagnosis. And we leave that colon there. Okay? When we run it, notice we now have a field called days to diagnosis. Exactly like we wanted. All right? If I remove the colon, I try to run it, the expression you entered contains invalid syntax. You may have entered an operand without an operator. So what it's saying is it's trying to figure out what exactly this days to diagnosis is. The system doesn't understand that. It understands this diagnosis table and the date diagnosed field. It understands the subtraction sign. It understands that this is the date of the initial visit field from the diagnosis table, but it's trying to decipher days to diagnosis. You have to leave the colon in. When I run it, there we go. So if you get that error, if you get the error in here that you're missing, you have invalid syntax, all right, one of the first things you should check is whether or not you have the colon. The second thing you check is your builder to ensure that everything looks right. The best thing might be to do, just redo it again if you're not missing the colon. So if you're not missing the colon, it may just be advantageous for you to rebuild it. Which, once again, if I don't see any expression categories, I'm coming to my database, going to tables. I'm going to find where I'm pulling the data from. I'm going to take the date diagnosed because it is the greater of the two. Now, your instructions may explain to you which way that these have to be in. You have to make sure to understand that. If your instructions told you to subtract the date of the initial visit from the date diagnosed, then you would have to put date diagnosed first, subtraction sign, date of initial visit. However, if it said to subtract the date diagnosed from the date of the initial visit, so this is subtracting the date diagnosed from the date of the initial visit. All right? You have to make sure to do it as you are told. Otherwise, you will not get the right answer. So we're going to subtract the date of the initial visit from the date diagnosed. Oops. Darn it. There we go. Okay. We're going to say okay. We're going to take and change it. Days to diagnosis. We're going to run it. There we go. Now this one, you would have to add a calculated field here to do that. And I just know that we did it correctly. Okay, so you can check that. You don't have time to do those types of things on your exams. Okay, so that's how to add a calculated field and name it as well. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and close it. We need to save. It's a good thing that well, that it reminded me, right? And we need to save it the number of days to diagnose patients. Oops. I hate it when it does that. There you go. Number of days to diagnose. Did I put diagnosis? To diagnosis patient. Maybe that should be number of days to patient diagnosis. Nobody said English was my strong suit. Sorry about that. Number of days to diagnosis patient. I can't even read. Okay, enough laughing. Let's get on with this. So the next thing we're going to talk about is a parameter query. Okay, parameter queries. So parameter queries, they're fairly simple in terms of creating, and it doesn't take much. Let's go ahead and we're just going to select all the fields from the diagnosis table, create a parameter query in the doctor ID field with the text, enter doctor ID. Okay, so what we're going to do, I think Gallstones, if I remember correctly, has all the fields. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to put, I didn't even say what to name it, so we can name this doctors patients. Okay, doctors, just like that. And now remember, whenever we do this, we are going to go and make sure that we delete all that. So these should be all the fields from the diagnosis table. I can just do a quick run through like this. Yes, 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 yes. Yep, and yep. Okay, so here's how we're going to do this, right? So people hear parameter query and they're like, I don't know what a parameter query is. And so they look after they've made their query and they look and they say, oh, parameters. Let me do this. Query parameters. Well, no, that's not where we want to do this. What we're going to do is we're actually going to go to the field specified. So we're going to go to the doctor ID field. And what we're going to do is we're going to open up brackets, okay, straight brackets in here, not the curly kind, but the straight kind. The brackets should be somewhere close to your enter or return key on your keyboard. And you're going to open up the bracket and you're going to type in enter doctor ID. And then you're going to close the bracket. Just like that. Enter doctor ID. And what that is going to do is whenever we run the query, it's going to force us to enter a doctor ID in order to see any values for our query. So if I don't enter a doctor ID in, I won't see anything. So what I have to do every time I open this, it's going to say enter a doctor ID. So I have to find a doctor ID. Cancel. Let me go here. I'm going to get Dr. Orville Redenbacher. Orville Redenbacher. There we go. And I'm going to go back to the doctor ID field, and I'm going to paste their doctor ID into there. Oh, well, Dr. Orville Redenbacher. What happened? Well, is this correct? We don't know because, well, maybe Dr. Redenbacher actually doesn't have anybody that they've seen. So let's see this. Dr. Orville Redenbacher. He doesn't have anybody. Okay? He doesn't have anybody. So that's so that means that maybe this is working, maybe it isn't. Why don't we try another patient or another doctor? How about Dr. Christina Yang? All right, Dr. Yang. So let's do this. Open it back up. Dr. Christina Yang. 85 patients. Let's see if we have, or 85 diagnoses. Not 85 patients, 85 diagnoses. All right. Oh, cancel. Nope. I'm going to filter for everything that is not only to show only Christine. There we go. She has 85 patients. All right. So we know that this is more than likely working as intended. Now, the question becomes, what happens if we mess this up and we accidentally put the parameter query in the wrong field? Because every time I open, right, every time I open, all I have to do is open it like that, come in here, delete it from one field, or let's say it was accidentally in the diagnosis field. We accidentally did that, right? So we run. If we try to enter a doctor's ID in the diagnosis field, right? So we try to run a doctor ID in the diagnosis field, then we're going to get, it's actually going to work now. So if we try to run the doctor ID in the diagnosis field, we would get nothing, right? So to do that, we just go back to design view and make sure it's in the right one. Okay, we make sure it's in the right, the correct place. Okay, as far as the parameter query is. So don't worry about this. Worry about this. All right, this is how to do the parameter query down here. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close that. So I want to talk about one last query type that you're going to have to use, and it's called an unmatched query. Okay, I don't think I have a slide for this one. Nope, I don't. Okay, it's called an unmatched query. Okay, and if you remember, to do an unmatched query, you have to come to the query wizard. Don't try to do it in query design. Try to do it in query wizard. Okay. So we're going to click on the unmatched query. Now what this query does, okay, we're going to try to find patients who don't have, we're going to try to find patients who aren't associated to doctors, okay? Because every patient should have a doctor, right? Every patient should have a doctor. So what we do is it asks you to select which query, table or query contains the records you want the query in the query results. Well, in this case, we want to see the patients table, right? Because we want to find all the patients that don't have doctors in them. Okay. And then we want the doctor table. Now what it's going to say is you'll come here and it says what piece of information is in both tables. So what that means is basically where does the patient's table and the doctor table, where does the patient table and the doctor table, where do they relate? Okay, if they don't relate to each other, you cannot do this. If they do relate to each other, then you can. So, in this case, if I open up the doctor table, I have doctor ID, doctor name, specialty, all these things over here. Okay, all these things over here. And then I go to the patient table, and I see I have patient ID, first name, last name, street number, street name, yada yada. And then I have this primary care physician down here. Now the thing about this primary care physician field is that actually in this instance, this field was created using a lookup wizard. Lookup. And it's supposed to look up the doctor's name, okay, from the doctor table, and it also caught the doctor ID. Now the reason that we use the doctor ID, we hid the key field in this one. If you have more than one field in your lookup field, and one of those fields is the key field, you can tell it to hide the key field. Okay, so the key field is the doctor ID. So we related these two tables by the doctor ID field. Okay, so these two tables are actually related by the doctor ID field. So when we're doing our our query wizard, okay, I need to close those. When we're doing our query wizard, that is very important. So we're going to find the unmatched. So this is going to come from the patients table, because the patients table is what we want to search. Okay, what we want to search to see if a patient is missing a doctor ID. Okay, or it doesn't have a doctor ID that matches. Okay, and in our patient table, the field PCP, which stands for primary care physician, is related to the doctor ID field. So that's what this means. This little symbol means that these two things are related. Okay, that's how they're related. They're related because we did the lookup. It might let us do it. I don't think our relationship shows that these two tables are related, but it might let us do it. So let's see. So what fields do I want to see in the query? Well, let me just I want patient ID, first name, last name, and primary care physician. Okay. Maybe I'll do state or city and state. And those two actually need to be in front of primary care physician. Of course. Right? There we go. Okay, because city and state might clue us into who who should be their primary care physician. Right? So we're going to go next. And it's going to suggest something. We can rename it. We can modify design. We're just going to view the results in this instance. So in this instance, we don't have patients without a doctor. So all of our patients have a doctor. And we test that out by coming over here and seeing to all of our patients. So let's unselect all these and the blank. This star means that it's a new field, so none of our patients are missing doctors. Okay, none of our patients are missing doctors in this instance. Okay, so once again, when you're creating this, okay, let me go ahead. This unmatched query. So query wizard, find unmatched. The first table you want to select is the table that you're going to pull the results from. In your Chapter 3 project, not the skill review, the one that's due on Monday or Tuesday the 16th. Yeah, Tuesday the 16th. Okay. It's going to ask you to do this, and it's going to say something. So it's going to give you two fields. It's going to give you two tables, and some of you are going to do it in reverse order. Okay, reverse order, and you're going to come here, and you're going to see. So some of you are going to get stuck here, and it's going to say, "Do not show." Or do not include one of the specific fields. And I think it's the primary key field. Okay. And what's going to happen is you're going to see the primary key field over here and this field over here, and you're going to try to remove or do something to it, and you're going to get stuck because you don't know that this is just asking where these two tables match together. So remember, this is where the two tables match together. Okay? In our instance, they match in the doctor ID field. When you show up, okay, in the PCP field, when you show up in your Chapter 3 project that will be due next Tuesday, it will automatically select these fields for you, and you just can click on next. This is where you want to select. It'll tell you select all the fields, I think, except for the one field it mentions that you don't select. Okay? So if I don't see, if I don't see that field in here, then I've done this part backwards, and I need to redo it the opposite way. All right? So if I don't see that field in here, then I have done my work backwards, and I need to come back and change it. Okay? All right. Hopefully this has helped. If you have any other questions, please let me know. I know Chapter 3 is very rough, but you can, y'all can get through it. I know you can do this. Please, 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 if you have questions, let me know. Good luck on this, and I'll see y'all next week.